What's up, everybody? My name is Brad and welcome to the channel. I appreciate you stopping by, hanging out for a little while I talk about some books. In today's video, this video has been a long time coming. I started the channel about 5 years ago now in 2019. I mainly talk about horror books on the channel, and I'm just now getting around to doing this video, which, like I said, it's been a long time in the making. And today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 favorite horror books of all time. And this was a really hard list to narrow down, to put together. It was tough. I usually don't do a lot of top 10, top 5 type videos. There's a few on the channel, but for me, ranking things that I like one above the other is really hard for me to do. Since I like them all, it's hard for me to put one above the other. Number 1 on this list was easy. Number 2 is pretty easy. And then after that, it was pretty tough for me to pick out which ones were going to go where after I figured out what my top 10 was even gonna be. But that's enough rambling. Let's go ahead and get into it. Like I said, these are my top 10 favorite horror books of all time. This list is fluid. It might change tomorrow. I don't know. Like I said, this is hard for me to do. Suffice it to say, I love all these books. They're all 5-star reads for me, and I highly recommend every single one of them, regardless of what order they happen to be on this list. All right, so let's dive into it. So number 10 is The Elementals by Michael McDowell. This is my first McDowell book. This is my only McDowell book. I really want to read his other works because I loved this one so much. It's Southern Gothic. It's probably one of the, I don't want to say the originators, but one of the more popular Southern Gothic books at the time when it came out. And I just love everything about it. The setting for me is the key to this one. I love the setting of it. I love the characters. I love what's going on with the story and the ghost and everything. But the setting for me is what really sets it apart for me personally, in my opinion. I love the 3 houses on the beach. They're identical. And one of them is just slowly being consumed by the sand. You know, it gets higher and higher every year. And it's a slow burn of a book. It's not something that's super fast paced and a lot of violence and stuff. So be warned of that if you go into it. It's super slow paced, but that's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. And I just love the unraveling of what's going on with the ghost and this family and everything on this house. The Elementals, it's a fantastic book, and I really want to read more Michael McDowell. So coming in at number 10 is The Elementals by Michael McDowell. Up next at number 9 is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I believe this was my first Stephen Graham Jones book. And I'll be honest, when I first started it, it was just okay. I was having trouble getting into it. It's sort of written in this sort of cadence, and I found out that I was reading it too fast. I had to slow down and actually pause at the periods and take my time with it, reading and digesting the story. And once I started to do that, it like just clicked for whatever reason, and I fell in love with it. And there's one particular scene, I think it's in my review, if I'm thinking back, I think it's about 40% in, where it's just like this whirlwind of activity, and it's crazy, and it was things I wasn't expecting this book to do, and it just blew me away. And I was already really enjoying the book, and from there on out, I just absolutely loved it, and it made me fall in love with the whole entire thing. I don't want to say too much about the plot, give anything away, but I loved this book. It's what turned me on to Stephen Graham Jones, and I've really honestly never read any other book quite like this one. Coming in at number 9 is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. Number 8, I'm having to look down here at my list, make sure I don't get anything out of order. Number 8 is The Reformatory by Tannen and Reeve Dew. This is a newer read for me. I read it January of this year, was book club book. It was the Spinebreakers book club pick for January of this year, and I loved it. There's another book. We'll backtrack. This book takes place in Florida. Is it the 1950s, I think? Yeah, 1950s in Florida at a reform school. There's another book that takes place at a reform school called The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. I loved that book. It's one of my favorite books of all time. This book is very similar, but this one has a supernatural lean to it. And I love Tannen Reeve's writing. I love the story. I loved everything about it. This book made me laugh at times. It made me really pissed off at times. It made me cry at times. And if a book can take you through that range of emotions, then it's doing something right. I think it's hard for a book to do that and do it well, and this one like checked all those boxes for me. Like I said, super sad, but it's a very, very great supernatural ghost story set in a really horrible racist period of time in America. And I think that doubles down on the sadness and anger that you feel towards the main character. A main character, he's like 12 years old. He's a pretty good kid, and he gets sent to a reform school for really just the most piddly thing you could think of, just because he's black, and the person that he did that to was a white kid. And so, now his life is essentially pretty much ruined at the moment in time because of something inconsequential like that. It's a fantastic story. I highly suggest you check it out. Number 8 is The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. Number 7 is The Hollow Kind by Andy Davidson. There's another book of his I've read called The Boatman's Daughter, and it was kind of a toss-up between those two as to which one I was going to put on this list. I think Andy Davidson is a very underrated author. I love his work, and I feel like people don't talk enough about him. His prose, it's lyrical, and it's beautiful, and it's fantastical at times. This is also another sort of Southern Gothic storyteller, especially The Boatman's Daughter is definitely Southern Gothic. This one is as well. But this one blends in some elements of like kind of cosmic horror, and if you're a fan of the show The Last of Us, some like spore horror, I think is what people kind of coined that as. There's a bear on the cover, and there's this just evil, this ancient evil in the ground here of the Hollow Kind that is sort of infecting things, taking them over, sort of like the mushrooms do in The Last of Us. But this book is great. It takes place in, is it Arkansas, I believe? I can't remember. I want to say it's Arkansas, but I don't know for sure. But it's on like this old, see, now I'm going to mess up because I don't remember what it is. Oh, it's like an old turpentine mill in the forest and the surrounding areas of that. And this family moves into this old house, this old family house of theirs. And they find out kind of the history and the evil that has saturated this land. I love this book. I love anything Andy Davidson has written. Number 7 is The Hollow Kind by Andy Davidson. Number 6 is Nas Fatu by Joe Hill. This one is my favorite Joe Hill book, and it reminds me so much of his dad, Stephen King. It's just really excellent storytelling. I love the characters in here. I love the Wraith. I'm blanking on the main character. Charlie Manx is the villain in here. I think he's a great villain. He's sort of spoilers, so if you haven't read it, this might be kind of a minor spoiler. He's like a vampire, but not like a blood-sucking vampire. He just like drains your energy, sucks out your soul, your will, and that was a really cool twist on like the vampire type of villain. I mean, he has this sort of other realm called Christmas Land where he kidnaps children and takes them to Christmas Land and kind of drains them. It's a really cool, imaginative story. Definitely feels like something Stephen King could have written. If you swap the names on there, if you're a fan of Stephen King, you haven't read Joe Hill, definitely check this one out. Nas Fatu, I thought was great. I really need to read more Joe Hill. I've read a few. I still need to read The Fireman and some of his short story stuff. But Nas Fatu by Joe Hill comes in at number 6. Number 5. Let's see. Number 5 is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. This book just blew me away in the way that I did not see any of the twists that are in here. I didn't see any of them coming. I've seen a few people read this and say it was kind of predictable and they didn't like the twist. For me, it was not predictable whatsoever. And I totally loved the explanation about why the things were and what happened, why it all did that. I didn't see it coming at all. And like I said, it really just blew my mind. I thought I'd figured everything out. I thought all the twists were done, and then another one would hit me, and it literally made my jaw drop while reading it. And that is a very rare thing for me to have happen, for me to be just utterly shocked and completely caught off guard by something that happens in a book. It's told from multiple perspectives. One of them is being a cat. I can't remember the cat's name. And that sounds kind of weird, but once you read it and figure out what's going on, it all makes sense. And I loved how she wrapped this book up. Everything is tied up in a pretty nice little bow at the end. And like I said, for me, it was a very shocking ending that I did not see coming. And I loved the explanation of it all, of why everything happened. So number 5 on the list, The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward. Number 4, one of the arguably the best horror movies of all time, is also arguably one of the best horror books of all time, and that is The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty. I listened to the 40th anniversary edition of this book which is narrated by the author himself. And I'm going to say I like the book more than the movie. The movie is fantastic, one of the best horror movies of all time, like I said. But for me, in my opinion, I think the book is a little bit better, which is tough to say for how great the movie is. But I think it's in part due to William Peter Blatty's narration. He is so creepy as the demonic Reagan. He just has this rough, gravelly, deep voice. And when he's reading demonic Reagan, it's just utterly chilling. And everyone knows what the story of The Exorcist is, so I won't go into that. But if you have never read the book and you're a fan of the movie, I highly, highly suggest you check out the book. And if you have a chance to get the audiobook, the one narrated by William Peter Blatty himself, because it is absolutely fantastic. So coming in at number 4 is The Exorcist, again by William Peter Blatty. So on to the top 3 now. Number 3, this is another more recentish read for me. This one is Swan Song by Robert R. McCammon. This is just fantastic. It's a big, epic, post-apocalyptic story. We have all these different groups of survivors whose storylines eventually intertwine and come together. Some are good, some are evil, some are kind of neutral in the middle. But I loved everything about this book. I love the post-apocalyptic setting, first of all. I love the characters. I love there's like this magical, fantastical realism element to the book. I just loved everything about it. It's great. I loved all the characters. Like I said, the story, post-apocalyptic setting. It's a big chunk of a book. It's like 900 something pages. It made me cry at the end. And anytime a book can make me cry at the end, it's probably a book that I loved. But yeah, this is fantastic. It is, for Robert McCammon, Swan Song is what The Stand is to Stephen King. So if you've ever read The Stand by Stephen King and loved it, I highly suggest you check out reading McCammon's Swan Song, because it is absolutely fantastic. And this is number 3 on my list. So top two, spoiler alert, they're both Stephen King books. And I tried not to put Stephen King on here 10 times because I could have probably done that. But I tried to broaden out and pick other books other than Stephen King. I think I have an old top 5 Stephen King books video. It's really, really old. It's like one of the first videos I ever did on the channel. I probably need to go back and update and maybe turn that into a top 10 favorite Stephen King books. But anyway, number 2 on the list is It by Stephen King. It's a big, epic story. I love the coming of age aspect of it, and the first half of it. Again, it's another book where the ending made me cry. It's a super bittersweet, sad, melancholy ending when you really think about what is happening. And I don't want to say what it is. But Pennywise himself, one of the most iconic horror villains of all time. He's great in here. I love the town of Derry. I love going through all the history of Derry and everything, and the kids' journey and their friendships together, bonding together, fighting back against Pennywise the Clown. It's just an awesome book. It's a big, epic book, over 1,000 pages. Really something you can sink your teeth into, no pun intended. Really get invested into the town itself and the story and the characters and the villains. Just loved everything about it, except for obviously the one scene that everyone picks out and says it ruined the book for him, which is like only a page long. If you can look past that, the rest of this book is awesome and amazing, and that's why it's number 2 of my favorite horror books of all time. And then coming in at number 1, I've already said Stephen King, and if you've been a fan of the channel for any amount of time, you already know what it's going to be, because I talk about it quite often. Number 1 for me is Stephen King's Salem's Lot. This was my first Stephen King book I ever read, and today it still is my favorite Stephen King book, and it's also my favorite horror book of all time. I love vampires. This is a vampire story. I love the town of Salem's Lot itself. Stephen King breathes life into this place, and there's all these side characters in this book, which for some people that might be kind of off-putting, like they don't care about the person that works at the bar, or the guy that lives in the trailer with his girlfriend and their baby's crying all the time, or the guy that works at the dump. But he brings these small side characters to life, and then when bad things happen to them, you feel really bad as the reader, like, oh man, I really like that character. And now they're dead because they've been consumed and they've turned into a vampire. But I think that's the magic of this book, bringing this small rural Maine town to life, and you getting invested in not only the main characters, Ben Mears and Susan and everybody, and Peter and Father Callahan, but all these small side minor characters as well. really gives this book life. And I think that's what makes it extra special for me, in my opinion. And plus, it's got vampires in it, which I love vampires, like I said. So this is my favorite vampire book, my favorite horror book of all time, and my favorite Stephen King book. That is Salem's Lot, again, by Stephen King. And that's it. Those are my top 10 horror books of all time. If you've read any of these, let me know what you thought about them. Are they one of your favorites? Do you disagree? Do you hate any of these books? Let me know what your thoughts are down in the comments below. Like I said, this has been a really tough video to do, narrowing it down to 10 and then picking what order they're going to come in was pretty tough. But I think I'm pleased with the placing of everything on this list. And maybe I'll expand it. Maybe I'll do a top 20 one day, do the bottom 10 and see what those might be. But that's it. That's all I have for you guys today. So appreciate your time. Thank you for spending your time with me. Again, my name is Brad, and I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.